Welcome, everyone. I'm Han Lee. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at IF, a foundation for radical possibility. I'm also a proud member of the RAG board, serving as our secretary, and I chaired our strategic planning committee. So we're so excited about our new strategic plan. We're excited to have you all here today to engage in a conversation about that plan and to actually do some brainstorming and planning with us. So today, what we want to do is to bring together RAG member CEOs and other key contacts to engage with our president and CEO, Ruth Latoisson-Eiffel, about her vision, hi Ruth, her vision for turning RAG into a racially just and philanthropy mobilizing organization, right? So what we hope comes out of our conversation today is that everyone will have a clearer understanding of RAG's new strategic plan, as well as how you as members are and will be a critical part of it. So a bit of a roadmap for our time together for the next hour and a half or so. I'm going to start by providing some context on the path that led us to the new strategic plan. Ruth will then give an overview of the plan, and then she and I will engage in some dialogue and discussion around various aspects of the plan that we're particularly excited about. And then you'll actually have a chance to share thoughts and ask questions. We encourage you to actively use the chat throughout the conversation, and certainly when it's time to do the Q&A, you can definitely put your questions in the chat, but we encourage folks to kind of unmute and just lift up your questions and comments so that we can engage in a dialogue together. And then we will jump into some interactive small group work to dig into the three key strategies of the plan, which are Convene, Mobilize, and Advocate. And then Ruth will close out our program with how we all can take action to move that plan forward. So let's start with how did we get here, right? How did we get to this new strategic plan? So I'm just going to touch on some key RAG milestones and transitions in our more recent history. And I will do that acknowledging that there are folks on this call. I see you, Pat Matthews, I see you, Mardell Moffat, and so many others who have been a part of this organization for much longer than I have. You know, and that have built the foundation for where we are today. So we acknowledge all of you and thank you for that. I know there are more, but I've made you small so I can see my notes. Thank you all for being a part of how we got here today. But I'm going to start just like say before 2015 in general, RAG, philanthropy, the country was not talking about racism explicitly. We were probably talking a lot around racism or racial equity, but not naming it explicitly. Didn't have, speaking in general terms, right, a very deep analysis around race, despite it being everywhere, right, steeped into all of us, the systems and institutions and structures that we're all a part of, and also have internalized into who we are. So a lot of things, you know, led up, I think, to wanting to be more explicit and talking about racism more explicitly as a community. And one of those was the 2015 police killing of Freddie Gray, which was very close to home in Baltimore and so egregious that I think a lot of RAG members and leadership said, we can't ignore this. You know, we can't keep talking around this issue. And as they were talking about it, realize we're not even using the same language, right? And we all are coming at this from different points of knowledge, perspectives, analyses, et cetera. So that's when the RAG, under the leadership of Tamara Copeland, launched the 2016 Putting Racism on the Table learning series so that we as a community could learn about the different aspects of race and racial equity and how that overlaps with our communities that we're working in and serving and the work that we're doing in philanthropy. And then what could we do with that knowledge? Also at the end of 2016, RAG kind of relaunched a revised version of its strategic plan, a 2017-2018 strategic plan. And it was in many ways a refresh of the previous plan, right? That really focused on regionalism, convening, educational opportunities, serving as a voice of philanthropy, building relationships, collaboration, and a solid financial foundation for the organization. I think the main difference in this 2017-2018 plan from the previous one was a little bit more of naming of racial equity as important to the region, right, and to RAG. In 2017, in large part coming out of the Putting Racism on the Table learning series, the Racial Equity Working Group was formed, which I had the honor of co-chairing, and we've had many fabulous chairs and co-chairs since. And among the many things that the RUG was about both learning and doing at the same time. And we had a series of great community conversations across the region in 2017 and 2018 that really drove, I think continues to drive the work, and certainly served as the foundation for where we are as an organization now around racial equity and justice. In 2018, RAG's board of directors voted to elevate the pursuit of racial equity to an ongoing organizational commitment. And that was big. And then I think through all of this, leading up to this and around this time, the RAG board and staff knew that we needed to undergo a new strategic planning process, but that was delayed for a lot of reasons, right? So there were several organizational transitions. Our longtime leader, Tamara Copeland, retired. Mady Henson came in and had a tenure in leadership. Ruth came in as an interim leader and then became permanent as our president and CEO in 2021. And then, of course, through much of that, a pandemic was sweeping the country, the globe, right? RAG went from a mainly in-person organization to an all virtual, fully virtual organization, like many of you did. We had a lull in programming, our staff turned over, and the US was undergoing a major racial reckoning, right? Alleged, like what's been reckoned is still to be determined. And we were engaged in a lawsuit. So sharing all of this, not as excuses for the delay in strategic planning, but this was the truth, right? This was our reality. And so the board and staff thought, it was time to do a strategic planning process in 2021. And not just because the work was overdue, but because we wanted to focus more, not just on words to say what we hoped, but we wanted to go through a process so that we can get on the same page and agree on who we are, what our community at these times demand of us to be and to do, and how we would actually do it. So the process for developing the strategic plan was we put together a strategic planning committee, which I chaired and was also joined by other board members, Amanda and Jerry from Funders Together, Robert Burns, then with Citi, now with Walton Foundation, Celeste James, then with Kaiser, now with Big Health, Amy Owens with the Community Foundation of Loudoun and Fauquier counties, Crystal Townsend from Healthcare Initiative Foundation, and then staff, Ruth and Todd Pittman, our Director of Member Experience. So we went through an extensive process of finding the right strategic planning consultant for us, and we ultimately chose Frontline Solutions because racial equity was not just kind of an add-on to their process, but it's baked into kind of the how and why of everything that they do. And so that process involved a lot of engagement of members and others. So we did an all-member survey, interviews with internal and external stakeholder groups. We did a benchmarking study of other philanthropy serving organizations, focus groups with Racial Equity Working Group and other working group chairs and leads. We did a lot of visioning and refining sessions with the RAG board and staff. And then the board approved our new strategic plan in October of 2021. And then Ruth presented it at our annual meeting in November, which we were so excited about and got, I think, really positive response to and a lot of excitement too. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Ruth now to provide an overview of that plan that we approved.
Hey, y'all. And I just want to say thanks to everyone for making the time to be here with us over your lunch break. I hope that you are eating something, snacking on something, drinking some tea or some coffee or some water. And so thanks for giving us this time. So Mayron is going to share her screen so that we can go through the strategic plan. And we thought that it would be important for us to all get together as leaders of our organization so that we could do a deeper dive into RAG strategic plan and what it means for RAG, what it means for how you all can hold us accountable, and what it means for your membership in the organization. Hold on, I've gone full screen. I need to see my notes. Okay, so you heard Han mention that one of the focus, or if you will, the three-part thrust for RAG is to convene, mobilize, and advocate. You can go to the next slide, Mayron. So how did we get there? We got there because there were a couple of known factors that rose to the top of our strategic planning survey, the focus groups, and the one-on-one interviews. On top of doing that, there was also a landscape study that was done where Frontline Solutions compared our work to other regional associations and other associations like ours, so that we would have at least a benchmark, right, of what it looked like for us to launch a new strategic plan, and why. So that survey, those interviews, those conversations led to these known factors, right? We know that the way that we've been doing things thus far in philanthropy has not, and will not lead to a more racially just and equitable region. And we're talking about the region writ large. We live together, we work together, we eat together, we work in each other's cities and counties. And so it's important for us to recognize that how we've been doing things thus far, the status quo, won't work. And then also, RAG just believes that we're uniquely positioned to leverage relationships across sectors, right? We have banks who are part of our members. We have foundations that are part of our members' membership. We have national organizations, local organizations, and various sectors that engage with us in order to move the needle forward when it comes to creating a more equitable region. So across systems, across sectors, we think that we're in a unique place to support some cross collaboration. And then we also recognize that we need to be like the agents and the constituencies for change, right? In order for our philanthropic ecosystem to change, it has to include nonprofits, impact investors, governments, and businesses, right? It takes a cross sector collaboration, and we need to be a part of those conversations, so that our grant dollars are being used for things that will actually solve problems, and so that we can use our relationships to do that as well, to move power, shift power, right? Another known factor is that we insist that racial equity is not just an aspect of our collective aspirations for this region, but it's the anchor, right? It means that in everything that we do, whether we care about the environment, whether we care about transportation, whether we're focused on food insecurity or housing or criminal justice or civic engagement, when you hold for race, you know that there are disparities that must be addressed. And so we have decided that that's the anchor of the work that we will do. And there's an urgency, right, for us to use and leverage this moment to make some significant shifts in the way that we do our work, and to deepen our commitment and scale our commitment to racial equity, not just as RAG, but for our members and our partners as well. And another known factor was that RAG is committed to being held accountable, and being accountable to our constituents. That's you, right? For the quality and the impact of our work, the way that we do it, the integrity, the principles that we leverage in order to execute that work. And we are willing to be held accountable for being more transparent in why we do things, when we do them, and who they impact. Next slide. Because of that, let me slow down, sorry. Because of that, we ultimately landed on this North Star, right? This North Star, again, is informed by your feedback in the strategic planning process, our listening sessions, and our working groups, right? We believe that a racially just and equitable region must be the vision for all of philanthropy, across all funding priorities, geographic scopes, across any types and sizes of our giving vehicles, right? And RAG is the place for all of us, right? For all of us who are committed to a racially just and equitable greater Washington region. That means that it's not just about our hearts, oh, I'm not racist. It's not just about us believing that about ourselves. It's about, well, what actions are we gonna take to ensure that that happens across the way that we do philanthropy in our organizations, in our relationships, with our investment portfolios, and in our grant making. Next slide. And so what ends up becoming the work? You can go to the next slide. We believe that it's RAG's work to organize, equip, invest in, and activate our members, our partners, and the community, along with other stakeholders, for a more racially just and equitable region. So our contribution to that includes shifting our practices, our local philanthropic practices, and our sector to be more rooted in and more anchored in racial equity. And then also creating spaces, right, for us to have conversations like these where we dig in a little bit deeper, where we learn together, we teach each other, but we also plan and invest and take action that pursues that goal, right? And so, if you're talking about, if your focus is on scholarships in your philanthropic practice, right? What does it mean to center a racially just and equitable practice into scholarships, right? And then, how do we do that together by learning together and by creating spaces for us to network and build community? And then also we want to attract and allocate more investments, right? And so our region needs more investments from us, but we also need to attract more investments to this region in order to help us solve some of our problems. We want it to be community led, but we need to attract your work as well as other investments to lead the sector in creating a more racially just and equitable region. And so how will we do that? Next slide, please. We'll do that by convening, advocating, and mobilizing, right? And so if we follow these three key components or pillars of the strategic plan, we believe that this is the way that you all will be able to hold us accountable to whether we are accomplishing the goal of the strategic plan. So let's dig in a little bit deeper. What is convene? Next slide. Convene is when we create spaces, as I said before, right, for us to learn about the community issues from experts and from each other. Experts doesn't just mean those of us who have degrees. It doesn't mean just those of us who have been in the sector for a long time. We're also talking about folks who have lived experience, right? So what's RAG's role in convening? We want to be a facilitator for our members and for the sector when it comes to learning, right? New people join philanthropy all the time. So there's some things that we're going to do that are going to be recurring. To make sure that there's at least this baseline of the things that we've learned for your trustees, for your new staff, for new CEOs. But we want to be the place where we can share practices and lessons learned from philanthropy. So people at least are having a baseline of what we've already learned, right? But then we also want to offer some identity-centered and issue-focused learning forums, right? You've seen some like women of color in philanthropy things taking place where RAG has participated. There may be some issue areas like criminal justice and education that may pop up as new for RAG, or maybe continuing efforts for us to center either our identity or our work and the issues that are important to us. We also want to provide some affinity learning opportunities, forums for corporate foundations, family foundations, privates, and for DAF holders, which don't always call themselves community foundations, but who hold DAFs and have a donor base as well as a giving requirement, right? And then offer some convening opportunities that are inclusive of all sectors, nonprofits, public sector. You saw us in December do some work with HAND, which focused on housing. And so there were banks, there were developers, there was philanthropy, and there were community organizers all at the table. And so sometimes we will convene across sectors, and we've already begun that work. Next slide. The other thing is mobilizing, right? And when we say mobilizing, we're literally talking about money, right? If we're not moving money to the places that need it the most, to the people who have been listened to the least, then we're not really centering a racially just and equitable region. So when we mobilize, we really want to harness the philanthropic influences and partnerships to increase attention to and investment in our neighborhoods, our communities, and the region. And so again, we're talking about money. We're talking about how we use our money, how we use our investments, and how we move them, mobilize them. Let's go to the next slide. RAG's role is to be an influencer of capital and resources, right, in the greater Washington region. If we're saying that this is who our members want RAG to be, then we'll use that influence, right, to leverage our relationships in philanthropy nationwide, to influence more philanthropic investments in the greater Washington region, whether that's in statehood, whether that's in housing, civic engagement. We will need resources from other places, and we want to be able to leverage our relationships, our previous working relationships in philanthropy to bring some funds to our region. We also want to align investments through public and private partnerships, right? So there are going to be times when we are going to be working with government and where we'll be working with businesses in order to align investments when people are thinking about moving to this area, being in this area, or helping to improve this area. We'll do a little bit of liaising between the local and federal government to make the case for more resources flowing to an equity-centered approach. Think too about like the effect that the overhead requirements have had on nonprofits, right? That's a place where all of our foundations have heard our nonprofits talk about it, right? Is there a role for RAG to come to the table to local government and say, hey, let's talk about these overhead requirements and the way that people are reporting their grant reports to you, and the effect that it has on their ability to operate their businesses, their nonprofits. And then also we want to build partnerships with other local and national PSOs in the region and conveners of nonprofits. You can go to the next slide. One example of that is the work that we're doing with the United Philanthropy Forum related to a sign-on letter for the Voting Rights Act, right? That's a way in which we're going to leverage PSO relationships, national PSO relationships, to move work forward. We'll be doing some more things with Grant Makers for Effective Organizations. And you saw us do a Philanthropology 101, which was like, just Philanthropy 101 for folks. And we partnered with EPIP, Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, to offer that to our members specifically. So the next thing, which may be one of the newer ways that we'll talk about our work, is advocacy, right? So this pillar really is about us catalyzing collective action of our members and stakeholders towards systems change around key issues that impact the region. Next slide. We'll likely do that through sign-on letters, through opportunities for us to engage with others, bringing governments to our tables, and going to government in certain instances to advocate for the things that we know are right and just for our region. But why are we doing this, right? We're doing it because there was a high level of interest in advocacy from our members. And in general, they wanted us to advocate more specifically about things that would create a more racially just and equitable region. And so when we get that call to action, there's a little bit of fear, like, how do we engage in this and not become lobbyists, right? But we believe that there is a safe space. Some of the nonprofits in this region have demonstrated their ability to advocate and to do so with your support. And so we believe that it's RAG's role to not only advocate on behalf of our members, but on behalf of the region and our residents. And so that increased interest and seeing it happen over time in our region with our nonprofits means that RAG as a nonprofit and as a membership organization can take that role. And so again, we'll be organizing for collective action and collective influence to be responsive to some of the things that are happening in the greater Washington region, not just in DC, but also in Northern Virginia and in Montgomery County and Prince George's County. And so your engagement with us gives us the opportunity to do that. What are the rising issues? What are the places where we need to take a stand? Where are places where we need to make statements or hold meetings in order to move the work? And then we want to create the platform and support that collective action. And sometimes that happens in our working groups. When we've identified an issue, you've seen in the past where the Racial Equity Working Group has said, hey, there's this thing, this issue at hand, and we need to respond to it. They created a statement and they educated the sector on why we need to take a stand to influence our lawmakers to make better decisions for our neighbors. And then we want to connect funders with local organizers and policy advocates. There are people who have been doing this for a very long time. And so sometimes it's not our position to take over the work, right? But better to leverage the work, create a platform for folks who have been organizing their communities for a long time, and seeing when they want us to use our influence and our relationships to solve problems they've been working on forever without taking the credit, but helping to move their work forward with our relationships. I think the biggest thing that we learned, and you can stop sharing, Mayron, I think the biggest thing that we learned over the course of the strategic planning process is that our members are standing ready to use their power and their influence and their endowments in ways that they haven't before, right? We've been doing grant making, we've been doing it for a while, and in some ways we're doing it effectively, and in other ways we're not. But it seems like there's other ways that we can use our power, and our members responded pretty intensely about how they wanted to move differently, leverage relationships differently, and use those relationships to solve community issues. So I'm excited to kind of engage in a conversation with Han. She'll ask me some tough questions, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing thus far and what we'll be doing in the future, how it aligns with our strategic plan.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's so funny. Like, I think both Ruth and I are fast talkers. And so thank you for hanging in there with us as we talk really quickly. And I think part of that is because we're just really, we're fast talkers. We're really excited about this work. And 3, there's a lot of work, right? This is a lot. This is really big, bold, and ambitious, and because we think it needs to be, and RAG can do it. And so, I will segue into my first question for you, Ruth, is, this is big, bold, and exciting. Why was it important for you as the new leader of the RAG to use this time when there was so much change happening, even internally, organizationally, to reimagine RAG's contribution and leadership within philanthropy?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about like internally, right? And then how that shows up externally. So for us, RAC went through a lot of staff transitions, and so I reorganized the organization, the org chart, if you will, a couple of times. And now that we have this new North Star, we're able to align every single one of our decisions with what it is that we hope to accomplish in those three pillars. And so the hiring of new staff, you have Chioma, who is on the line. She's our new director of programs and partnerships. And having someone who can focus primarily on how do we strengthen our working groups? How do we align our programming and our relationships with our strategic plan? Having someone who helps to focus on that every single day, day in and day out, was really important. We spent a year really focusing on just trying to move from being in person to virtual. And so now having someone who focuses on that and moves that work forward every single day is helpful to us, because it's going to foster the learning that we want to occur so that we can do, all of us, all of our members and our partners, so that we can do our jobs better. And then we also hired Lenny, who came from a member of the Weisberg Foundation. And Lenny's our new director of strategy and administration. Lenny's not new to the sector and not new to the region. We all know Lenny. Some of us know Lenny very well. But Lenny's role will be to build the infrastructure of our operations, right? We've streamlined things. We did a lot in this last year to get us to like build.com and to move our tech from a physical network to a virtual network. We changed a lot of providers. And now Lenny's going to take all of that and move that in an effective way so that we can have a strong fiscal sponsorship program. We've been a fiscal sponsor, I think, over the course of the life of RAG. And so it's like, well, how can we do it well? How can we see our fiscal sponsors as partners, but also work so that our fiscal sponsors can focus on their mission? I believe that fiscal sponsorship at RAG is like the family and friends round of great ideas that happen in neighborhoods when people don't have all of the time to focus on operations, but they have great ideas, great relationships. And so RAG takes some of that operational burden off of them so that those neighborhood strategies, those local strategies can be effective. And right now, many of our fiscally sponsored programs have a regional focus, and two of them at least have a national focus. I'm sorry, three of them have a national focus. But we want to kind of drill down into our region and have more BIPOC-led ideas and be their family and friends round, right? And be that wraparound support for them. And Lenny's going to build that out for us. I'm excited about that. And then having new working groups, right? This kind of hits on the Convene pillar of the working of the strategic plan. It was important for us to really bring back our programs and policy committee so that we could decide together as a membership, what are the things that we're going to advocate for? Where are we going to spend our time collectively advocating, whether it's on a national level or on a local level, to accomplish the things that would help us to become a more racially just and equitable Greater Washington region. So bringing that working group back, but then also doing campaigns like Let's Go DMV. It's some of the bravest work that RAG has ever done. The Let's Go DMV campaign in partnership with IF, Amalgamated, who's on the call, the Greater Washington Community Foundation, two community organizers, and Rock DC. It's strong, powerful work. And the Let's Go DMV campaign isn't the only guaranteed income campaign that's happening in this region. So what would it mean for us all to sit at a table together based on something that's emergent, based on something that we're trying to build our philanthropic practice around? What would it mean for us to pull ourselves together and to, on a consistent basis, meet and develop our processes and improve our guaranteed income, not only practices, but also the advocacy around why we're doing guaranteed income in the first place, right? And then this is a great time for us to do a rebrand. Some people love the name RAG. Some folks don't like the name RAG. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so we're definitely considering a rebrand, which means maybe the colors and the logo might change. No, the colors and the logo will change. Um, but we'll be engaging our members over the next year to find out, how do you all feel about the name? Is there a more powerful name? Is there a name that really speaks to who we want to be? Is there a name that will help us to drive our strategic plan and to think about ourselves differently? And so we're going to put it out there. We're going to have focus groups and surveys, and a new strategic plan is a good opportunity to at least explore it. And if we keep the name, we keep the name, but we want to get feedback from you all on that. And it's also our 30th anniversary. And so, we could just, I don't know what y'all did when y'all turned 30, but I went to Cuba. But it was a good time for me to be like, let me reflect on the things that I've done in the past. Let me reflect on who I want to be in the future. And so I think it's a good time for us to do some healing and some reparations of at least relationships, as we explore what's next for RAG when it comes to creating a more racially just and equitable region in partnership with our members, and with the community.
That's a lot. Thank you. And I think you went, the next question I was going to ask you is like, what excites you about the North Star of the RAG, which is that we believe that that racial justice needs to be the anchor for all that we do. And everything that you named there, it is certainly an anchor, not just an aspect or a component of it. So that's super exciting. And by the way, for my 30th birthday, I learned how to text. So shout out to all the Gen Xers out there. I literally had millennials teaching me how to text on my 30th birthday. So Ruth, I know that you and I share the belief that for integrity to be effective, but just to for racial justice to truly be able to be realized, that we need to do truth telling, right? So yeah. It's time for a little bit of truth telling. So and the truth is that with all of the best intentions philanthropy has had and still continues to have, our impact has not always been positive to the communities that we actually seek to serve, right? And engage and build power in. So in what ways do you think philanthropy has hindered progress towards racial equity or equity and justice, right? Racial equity and justice. And what can RAG do to help shift the culture of philanthropy?
Yeah, I think that philanthropy has the tendency, and we have the tendency to create a scarcity mindset. You only got 5% of your endowment that you want to give out, and so you only have 5% for everyone to fuss over, to compete over, rather than collaborate with. And so this redistribution of power is something that we have to evaluate, right? So we may have built wealth. Foundations may have built wealth in a myriad of ways, some that helped, but many ways that hurt the community. And so technically we built this money, right? On the backs of laborers, of workers who are now still disadvantaged in their own communities where they've lived their entire lives. So what does it mean for us to redistribute that power and to talk about it differently and to consider the fact that this might be their money anyway? And so how can we have community-led grant making? How can we think through what it means to make investments in our endowment that are specifically for the people who we say we want to serve the most? And then also for us to consider those grant applications. Are they accessible to nonprofits who have smaller budgets and smaller staff? I think we have to think about how can we make it easier for people to tap into the resources for them to solve their own community problems. Self-determination is a huge concept in the Black community. And if you've heard at all about Kwanzaa and some of those principles, we really think about the fact that folks should be able to determine what they do next. They should be able to determine, how they want to live their lives. And a lot of times we move based on where the money is. There's this brand new idea, solar power is coming out. We got to get everybody solar power jobs. Well, but what if I want to be a nonprofit leader, but I've been pushed into this direction because we're following money rather than listening to the people and what the people need. I think that, in my neighborhood, there's a lady who lives just across the street and she runs this block. right? She knows what the children on the street need. She knows, when someone is in dire straits and what we can do to support them. And what would it mean for you to come to my community and say, oh, I'm going to put a church right here and I'm going to put a community center right there. And no one ever asked Miss Kita what she knows about the community and how we could use our resources to improve her street, her block, right? And so part of it is like we can't just come in with our educational solutions. We have to have community-led solutions, and we have to fund their ideas like through general operating support, through easier grant making. And also we spend so much time glorifying what we do with that 5% of our endowment, that we almost hide what we're doing with the 95% of our money. And so I want to see us change that a little bit. I want to see us talk about it more candidly. And I'm sure I'm speaking about it super candidly right now, but when we get into a working group or into a learning session, like I want to see all of us explore what we could possibly do differently.
Yeah, feel that. So I have a couple more questions. I want to get to the participants' questions and feedback, but there is one question I want to make sure we speak to because it is so important.
Yeah.
And that is around accountability, right? We know that philanthropy isn't often held accountable to what we say we're about or what we do. And so how will RAG, and how does RAG intend to be accountable to our membership, even to our staff, to our community, to all of our stakeholders?
So I think, again, I'll start internally. The second portion of our strategic plan is for us to evaluate our internal culture. And I think that if our members say that they want us to be an organization that convenes, mobilizes, and advocates, we need to have a sustainable internal culture. And I think that we've caused harm in some ways because of our internal culture. There are things that we need to address in order to have higher retention so that we can continue to move things forward. And so we'll be working with Frontline Solutions on our equity footprint, and they'll be working with us on how to build a stronger internal culture and to establish some cultural values. I think that's important. We have to name it in order for us to have effective relationships. But past that, it's our responsibility, I think, to design events that lead to more effective philanthropy. Again, for us to have these types of conversations very candidly with each other, and for us to be willing to be learners at the same time that we're actors. So it's important, I think, for us to increase topics about philanthropic practice, how we're doing our jobs, at the same time elevating different ways that we should be thinking about issue areas. So that's one way that I think that from the Convene perspective, you'll see us making some changes. And we want to use the working group time to really develop ideas that are aligned with the strategic plan and work that can be done. We want those working groups to be action oriented. And so if that action is educating the sector on a topic so that we can invest more dollars, if that action is pulling together to advance some sort of political issue or policy issue, excuse me, then we should be using working group time to do that, to organize, right? It's not always just going to be the time for us to powwow. Sometimes it's going to be the place for us to learn, and sometimes it's going to be the place for us to create strategies to advance the work or to support advocacy that's already taking place. And we also want to make time for celebration, right? We have lots of things to celebrate. Our identities are things that we should celebrate. New innovations are things that we should celebrate. And we want to be able to talk about those. And we want to talk about our failures too, right? We learn from our failures. So if we were to have a failure lab on, some ineffective philanthropy that we've done in the past, admit that we've done it, do some truth telling, and then talk about the new way that we're going to do our work, we can both acknowledge where we failed and also celebrate our learnings and the innovations that have come out of our failures. And so with RAG turning 30, I think it's a unique opportunity for us to do all of those things. Of course, we'll scaffold them. We can't do them all at one time. But your engagement with RAG and helping us to build the support of RAG, I think it'll get us there.
Oh, I love a good segue. So speaking of engagement, so now's the time that we turn the program over to all of you, right? So I just invite you to unmute your audio and share any questions or reactions or feedback that you have. If you're more comfortable raising your hand or putting it in the chat, that is also welcome.
Hi,
Jane.
this is Jane Thompson with the Diversity Fund. That's great, exciting. I've just a little bit more on what you call your programs, and then like how do those fit within your 3 buckets within your strategic plan? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jane. So our programs will always consist of working groups, right? And so that's where those issue areas will come to play. And so the working groups will always be hopefully moving work forward, working. And so we love to have co-chairs who strategize that work, and to have program staff, Chioma and the program associate who she's hiring, to have them to help you set that agenda and to move that work forward. Do the scheduling, do the agendas, right? Bring in the speakers, bring in those leaders who need to help us frame the work. But then just using that time to actually decide on where we will advocate, and decide on where we still need to educate the sector. And then the other part of the programs will be learning opportunities, right? And so there are going to be times when we are talking about issue areas and or philanthropic practice, right? How are you investing your endowment? What does it mean to do effective grant making? Is it trust-based? Is it community-led? Are we considering who we are funding? And are we centering racial equity in everything that we do? The question is, like, do we always need a racial equity working group? Or will the working groups get to a place, and will all programming get to a place where we're centering racial equity, regardless of the topic or the issue area? And so Chioma's really going to be digging deep into like the webinars that we're doing, the in-person meetings that we're doing, and also creating a space for our members to talk about how they are engaging with community and doing so effectively, right? So we still want RAG to be the place that you come to share your work with your peers, and where you come to elevate some of the nonprofits that are doing great work, and making change in the community based on those advocacy initiatives that we've set. Does that make sense, Jane?
And Ruth, you touched on my question a little bit, but maybe we could delve into it a little bit deeper with regards to the racial equity working group. Because I was active in that for several years and regret that I haven't in the past year. But when I was a part of it, it was always a little bit of an identity crisis with, does the racial equity working group need to touch everything that has to do with racial equity? And now that racial equity is the work, and really should be that through line with all of the programs, how do you envision the maybe priorities of that group? And it's fine if that's, TBD and sort of evolving too, but we've sort of struggled with that internally in my organization as well. It's like, we don't want racial equity to be an add-on. We want it to be all through. So how do you organize around that?
No, that's a great question. The Racial Equity Working Group actually created an identity document that talked about ways in which they thought RAG could change, and ways in which we could hold each other accountable. I think we'll be using that identity document to make a determination about, like, do we use this identity document as part of our policy and programs committee? Do we use this identity document and share it so that each of the working groups can create one that centers racial equity? I think that's some of the exploration that we're doing now, but that identity document was created at the end of, I think at the end of September or October, right before we launched the strategic plan. And I think we'll be sharing it as an example, so that folks, when they talk about their work, if you're talking about civic engagement, what does civic engagement have to do with racial equity? Or what does racial equity have to do with civic engagement? And making sure we're pancaking that, right, into and baking it into everything that we do. I know that, like, our board is already exploring our bylaws. Like, do our bylaws promote social justice and racial equity? Who's allowed to be on the board? Who's allowed to be a member? And then how do we flip that on its side to make a more just engagement with philanthropy? And so if we're doing it at the board level, I know we can do it in the working group level. And I think that once we identify co-chairs for the racial equity working group, I think that by the end of this year, we'll know, do we keep that as a group? Do we transition it? Or does it become, like you said, a through line?
Thank you for those questions. We have time for one more question or comment. Hey, Lisa.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Cohen with Open Horizon. And Ruth, so appreciating the energy and brilliance that you're bringing to all this. I've heard you mention the issue of DC statehood, and I'm curious to hear you say maybe just a little bit more about it, and maybe even it's a way to think about the Convene, Mobilize, Advocate of sort of what you might dream or desire for RAG to do in this area.
Yeah. My dream, and I've been talking about statehood since I came in as interim, because I had about 40 listening sessions with folks from foundations, and it just kept on coming up, kept on coming up. And I know that some boards and some CEOs are like, I don't know what this has to do with me, and I'm definitely not about to move this work forward. But, you know, I just posted today on LinkedIn about how Ted Cruz is introducing legislation in order to turn over DC's vaccine mandate for children. Because we are led by Congress, he can do that. And maybe that doesn't happen this year, but what if it was 2 years ago, right? And that's when the pandemic hit, and we made the decision to have vaccines for children, and they turned it over, right? It is possible for that to happen. It happened with during the HIV and AIDS pandemic. We made a decision about how we would get folks to turn in their needles, and Congress overturned it. And so I think that it's important for us to consider quite a few things. One, it's a racial justice issue. It is a social justice issue, and it's an issue of democracy and voting rights. But it also is about people in DC having local power, right? Federalism is about letting the federal government do what the federal government does and letting local folks do what local folks do. And if every time a DC official makes a decision that Congress can turn over, then we're not really ceding power for the people who live here. We're not saying they have the power to determine how they'll live their lives, who they will elect, and giving the folks who they elect the ability to lead them. So I believe that RAG is uniquely positioned to connect local foundations with national foundations. For us to talk, for Lisa, for you to talk to the other, Open Horizon Foundation that exists in Minnesota, and for you to have a conversation with them about why DC statehood should matter. But I think it starts here first, because the counties in Maryland and Virginia have already said that they support DC statehood, and I'm going to speed it up. I know we have a breakout session, Chioma. They've already said that they support DC statehood and have said that they don't want DC to be in Virginia and don't want DC to be in Maryland, right? Maryland don't want us, Virginia doesn't want us, and DC, 86% of the population wants statehood. And so I think it's important for us to educate folks on that. We did that, and I want to be honest, we did that at the annual meeting, but we need more people to attend those types of sessions, and for you all to use your influence to say, hey, this is a topic that I really want us to address. Even if it means that we start with a sign-on letter and an educational campaign to get folks involved locally. We need our Maryland funders and our Virginia funders, who are our neighbors, to care enough to push the issue, to care enough to say, well, we support this issue and we'll talk about it anywhere. We don't even live in DC, but we support this and we support our neighbors. I think it starts there. Most of the DC funders are down. And so I think that once we get the entire region on board, and also talk to some national funders, use our platforms to go to some national conferences to talk about the work and why we're doing it and who's been doing it here for a really long time. I think that's how we use the Advocate, the Mobilize, and the Convene.